It was a warm Saturday evening, the kind that makes people want to dress up and enjoy the night. The city lights were starting to glow and the streets buzzed with laughter and the sound of distant music. Inside a small but cozy restaurant downtown, a couple walked in hand. They had been together for almost 6 years, and tonight was supposed to be special. It was his birthday. He had been talking about it all week, joking that he wanted something big this year. "A real celebration," he said with a grin. His wife had smiled back, saying she had something planned. She wasn't the flashy type, but she always made things meaningful. She had spent the afternoon preparing. Her hair was neatly done, her dress was a soft shade of blue, and she wore the necklace he gave her last Christmas. She looked radiant but calm, the kind of calm that comes from quiet confidence. He, on the other hand, looked excited. He wore his favorite jacket, the one she had ironed for him before they left. The restaurant had a warm glow. Small candles flickered on each table. Soft music played in the background, and the smell of grilled food filled the air. A waiter led them to their table near the window. She had reserved it earlier because she knew he loved watching the city lights while eating. He looked around, nodding approvingly. "Nice spot," he said, smiling. "I thought you'd like it," she replied, returning the smile. The evening began perfectly. They ordered his favorite dish, grilled salmon with buttered potatoes, and a small bottle of wine. They talked about work, laughed about old memories, and even planned a small getaway for later in the month. Everything seemed right. As they ate, a few of their friends arrived, 2 couples they often spent weekends with. They had been invited as a surprise. He was delighted. He laughed louder, told stories, and even cracked a few jokes that made everyone laugh. His wife sat beside him, smiling quietly, watching him enjoy the attention. After dinner, the lights dimmed slightly, and a waiter brought out a cake, a tall red velvet cake covered in white frosting. The words "Happy Birthday" were written in soft gold icing. Everyone clapped and cheered. He grinned wide, looking at his wife. "You really outdid yourself," he said, clearly impressed. She laughed softly. "Well, it's your day. You deserve something nice." The waiter set the cake down and everyone began taking pictures. He made a wish and blew out the candles while his friends cheered. It was the kind of moment that looked perfect. The smiles, the laughter, the light glimmering off the wine glasses. For a while, everything felt easy. But life has a way of changing its tone without warning. When the fun started to settle, and plates were cleared away, the waiter quietly placed the bill on the table. It was folded neatly inside a small black folder, sitting between them. She reached for her purse instinctively, but before she could open it, he picked it up. He glanced at the total and raised his eyebrows. "Wow, they sure charge a lot for birthday fun," he said half-jokingly, then looked at her. She smiled lightly, trying to keep things smooth. "Yeah, it's a bit pricey, but it was worth it." "You had a good time?" He nodded, then asked, "So you're covering it, right?" Her hand froze for a moment. She hadn't expected the question to sound so sharp. She looked at him, her voice calm. "I already paid for the cake earlier, and I covered the deposit when I booked the table. I thought we'd split the rest." He frowned slightly. "Split? It's my birthday." "You said you were taking me out." She took a slow breath. "I did, and I've already covered most of it. I just don't have enough on me to cover everything right now. I can send the rest later tonight." His friends went quiet. The air shifted slightly, the laughter fading. The waiter stood nearby, pretending not to listen. He leaned back, crossing his arms. "You're telling me you brought me out here for my birthday, invited people, and didn't even plan to pay for it all?" She felt a small knot form in her stomach, but tried to keep her tone steady. "That's not fair. I planned this, paid for the cake, and made sure everything went well. I didn't expect it to get this expensive." He let out a short laugh, but it wasn't friendly. Unbelievable. One of their friends tried to lighten the mood. "Hey, it's fine, man. We can chip in if it's too much," but he waved them off. "No, that's not the point. If you say you're taking someone out, you should be ready to handle it." His wife looked down, embarrassed but calm. She didn't want a scene. "I'll take care of it. Let's just finish the night peacefully." But the damage was already done. His pride had been touched, and in front of his friends it burned more than it should have. The waiter returned, politely asking if everything was okay. She nodded quickly and said, "Yes, please give me a minute." She began counting the bills she had in her purse, realizing she was short by just a small amount. He looked at her struggle, then exhaled sharply. "You know what? Forget it. He grabbed the plate that still had a piece of cake on it, the very cake she had ordered and paid for, and before anyone could react, he tossed it toward her. It wasn't a full throw, more like a swipe of frustration, but it was enough. The cake hit her arm, leaving a streak of frosting on her sleeve. A piece fell onto the table, landing near the glasses. The restaurant went completely silent. Her eyes widened, not out of fear but out of disbelief. She stared at him, her lips parted, her hands trembling slightly. One of their friends gasped softly. The waiter froze in place, unsure of what to do. He realized what he had done, but instead of apologizing, he muttered, "That's what happens when people play games." For a few long seconds, no one moved. The music in the restaurant kept playing softly, a slow jazz tune that felt painfully out of place. She blinked, her mind catching up with what had just happened. Then she did something no one expected. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She didn't even look around to see who was watching. She picked up her napkin, wiped her sleeve quietly, and straightened her posture. Her voice was steady, almost too calm for the situation. "Thank you for showing me who you are," she said softly. He frowned, his face hard to read. She turned to the waiter and said, "I'm so sorry for the mess. Could you please bring the manager?" The waiter nodded quickly, rushing off. Her friends sat frozen, exchanging uneasy looks. One of them whispered, "Are you okay?" She nodded. "I'm fine." When the manager came, she apologized again, saying she didn't want trouble and that she would pay for the damage and part of the bill she could cover now. The manager, clearly uncomfortable but sympathetic, assured her it was all right and that they could settle it quietly. Her husband, or perhaps by now, just the man sitting across from her, sat in silence, watching as she handled everything with quiet grace. The shame on his face was visible, but she didn't say another word. After everything was settled, she picked up her small purse, gave her friends a polite smile, and walked out of the restaurant. Her steps were calm, not hurried. There was no anger in her stride, only strength. Outside, the night air was cool. The city lights glimmered against the glass windows, and a faint breeze brushed her face. She took a deep breath, letting the moment settle inside her. Behind her, through the glass, the restaurant continued to buzz again as people whispered. Pretending not to stare, she didn't look back. For her, the night that was meant to be a celebration had turned into something entirely different, a moment of truth. And though it had hurt deeply, it also revealed something important. Some people show their real selves not when things go wrong, but when their pride is tested. She kept walking down the sidewalk, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. Her phone buzzed, one of her friends texting to check if she was okay. She typed back a short reply, "I'm fine. I'll talk to you later." And as she walked away, she whispered to herself, "This won't break me." It didn't sound like anger. It sounded like a promise. The cool air outside felt like a quiet relief after everything that happened inside the restaurant. The woman walked slowly down the street, her heels tapping lightly against the pavement. The city lights shimmered around her, but she wasn't really seeing them. Her thoughts were tangled, replaying the moment over and over again. The laughter that had turned to silence, the cake that had hit her arm, and the look on his face when it happened. It didn't make sense. She had done everything to make the evening special. She wanted it to be memorable for the right reasons. She had planned, saved, and even borrowed a little just to make sure he would feel celebrated. And yet the night ended with humiliation. Still, she didn't cry. Not there, not on the sidewalk. She just kept walking, clutching her small purse tightly, her mind quietly repeating the same thought. Don't break down here. Just get home. When she finally reached her car, she sat inside for a few minutes before even turning on the engine. The city noise faded behind the closed doors, leaving only the sound of her own breathing. She looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror. There was a faint streak of frosting on her sleeve that she hadn't noticed before. She brushed it off carefully as if removing the last trace of what happened. Why did it have to go like that? She whispered to herself. It wasn't the first time he had been short-tempered, but this felt different. This time there had been witnesses. This time it was public. She had seen the shock on their friends' faces. One of them had even started recording before things turned ugly, just capturing the cake moment for social media. Now she wondered if that short clip might end up somewhere. There was silence again. Outside, a car passed by, the sound fading into the distance. After a few minutes, she said, "I think we both need some space. I need time to think about everything." He looked at her, worry flickering in his eyes. "Are you saying we're done?" "I'm saying I need time," she replied. "Time to heal. Time to figure out if I can still trust you to respect me." He nodded slowly, then stood. "I understand." He paused before leaving. "For what it's worth, you handled it better than I ever could have. Everyone's talking about how calm you were." She gave a small, tired smile. "Calm isn't the same as okay." When he left, she sat back down by the window. The morning light felt warmer now, softer somehow. She picked up her phone again and opened her social media. The video was still there, but something unexpected had happened. People were commenting, not to gossip, but to support her. Messages like, "She's so graceful," and "This woman has class," filled the screen. Some even said her calmness had inspired them to handle their own troubles differently. She didn't reply to any of them. She just smiled faintly, grateful that something positive could come from something painful. Over the next few days, she focused on herself. She went for walks in the park, spent time reading, and tried to find peace in quiet moments. The noise online started to fade, but a few people continued to share kind messages. One person even wrote, "Respect costs nothing, but losing it costs everything." The words stuck with her. A week later, one of her friends called and said, "You should tell your side. People want to hear from you." She thought about it for a long time. Then one evening, she sat down and recorded a short video on her phone. She didn't talk about the argument or blame anyone. She simply said, "Sometimes life teaches you lessons in public, but how you respond to those lessons, that's what defines you." Anger fades, but grace stays. The video wasn't fancy. It was quiet, honest, and straight from the heart. Within hours, it began to spread. People commented about how her calmness gave them hope, how her words helped them think differently about their own struggles. She hadn't planned to become an example, but in a way, she did. Not because she wanted attention, but because she chose peace over pride. That night, as she turned off her phone and sat by the window again, she whispered softly, "Maybe this happened for a reason." She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if he would change or if things between them could ever go back to what they were. But she knew one thing for sure. She had found her strength, and sometimes strength doesn't come from shouting or fighting back. It comes from standing tall when everything around you tries to pull you down. As she sipped her tea, she looked out at the quiet street below, feeling a small spark of hope. The world had seen her pain, but they had also seen her power, and that was something no one could take away. The days that followed felt strange, almost like life had slowed down on purpose. The woman still went to work, still followed her routines, but something inside her had changed. She had spent years trying to make things look perfect. Her relationship, her home, her life. But now she was learning to live honestly, even if that meant being seen in her most vulnerable moment. The short video she posted, the one where she spoke quietly about grace and self-respect, had started to reach people far beyond her circle. Every day more comments appeared. Some were from strangers in other cities, even other countries. They wrote about how her calmness gave them courage to walk away from painful situations or to speak up without losing their peace. At first, she didn't know how to react. She never meant to inspire anyone. She was just trying to heal. But when people began sending messages saying things like, "Thank you for helping me see that I can stay calm and still be strong," she realized something. Maybe her pain had a purpose after all. One morning, as she sipped her coffee by the window, her phone buzzed with a message from a woman she didn't know. The message said, "I saw what happened. You reminded me that silence doesn't mean weakness. I needed to see that." Reading those words brought tears to her eyes. Not the sad kind, but the kind that come from feeling seen. She had felt so alone that night in the restaurant, but now she realized thousands of people understood that moment in their own way. She decided to record another video. This time she set her phone on the kitchen counter and spoke naturally as if talking to a friend. "I didn't expect anyone to care about what I said last time," she began. "But since so many of you reached out, I just want to remind you, it's okay to walk away from moments that steal your peace. It's not weakness to choose calm over chaos. It's strength." Her voice was gentle, but her eyes carried quiet power. She didn't talk about her personal story directly, but people knew what she meant. The comments poured in again. People thanking her, people sharing their own stories, people telling her how they replayed her video when they felt hurt or disrespected. In less than a week, her follower count grew. A few small media pages started reposting her videos, calling her the calm woman or the woman who taught us grace. She smiled at the titles but didn't let them change who she was. She still went to work, still did her chores, still watered her plants every morning. Life continued. Only now she carried a sense of quiet purpose. But not everything was easy. One afternoon, while scrolling through messages, she saw a few harsh comments too. Some people wrote things like, "She's just pretending to be calm for attention," or, "If that was me, I'd never let someone disrespect me like that." She stared at those words for a moment, then put her phone down. It stung, but she reminded herself that people only see a small piece of the story. Everyone has their own way of understanding pain. Instead of responding, she took a walk to clear her head. The park near her apartment was quiet, filled with the sound of birds and children playing in the distance. As she sat on a bench, she saw a couple walking by, laughing together. For a moment, she felt a small ache in her heart. She missed how simple things used to feel. The laughter, the shared plans, the small gestures that once made her feel loved. But she also knew that peace was better than pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. Later that evening, her phone rang. It was him. She stared at the screen for a long time before answering. "Hello," she said softly. "Hey." His voice was quiet, careful. "I've been thinking about everything. I saw your videos." She stayed silent for a moment, waiting for him to continue. "You're helping people," he said. "You've always had that gift, knowing how to make others feel calm." "Maybe," she said. "But I didn't plan for any of this." "I know," he replied. "Listen, I just wanted to say I'm proud of you. And I'm sorry again. For that night and for everything before it." His voice sounded sincere, but also uncertain. She didn't feel anger anymore, just a quiet distance. "I appreciate that," she said. "I really do. I hope you're taking care of yourself." There was a pause. Then he said, "I'd like to talk sometime." "In person," she hesitated. "Maybe one day," she said. "But not right now. I'm still figuring myself out," he sighed. "I understand." After they hung up, she sat in silence for a while. She wasn't angry or sad, just thoughtful. Some part of her still cared about him, but she knew caring didn't always mean going back. Sometimes love wasn't enough to heal what respect had broken. That night she journaled before bed, something she hadn't done in years. She wrote about forgiveness, about pain, and about how peace isn't something you find once and keep forever. It's something you choose every single day. The next morning she posted another video, not planned, not polished. She was wearing a simple t-shirt, sitting on her couch with sunlight behind her. She said, "People ask how I stayed calm that night. The truth is, I didn't feel calm inside. I just chose not to add more noise to an already painful moment. Sometimes silence speaks louder than shouting." That video went viral. It wasn't the kind of viral filled with gossip or drama. It was filled with empathy. People commented things like, "This is exactly what I needed today," and she turned humiliation into hope. Soon, she began receiving invitations to speak online, small talk shows, podcast interviews, women's discussion panels. At first she was nervous. She wasn't a public speaker. She was just a regular woman who had gone through something messy. But the hosts always told her the same thing. Just be yourself. That's what people connect with. And so she did. Each time she spoke, she didn't talk about the argument or the cake or the restaurant. She talked about dignity, respect, and how people can find calm in the middle of storms. Her soft voice carried weight. People listened, not because she was loud, but because she was real. One day, a young woman approached her after one of the small events. She looked nervous, clutching her phone. "I just wanted to thank you," she said. "I was in a relationship where I kept losing myself. Watching your videos helped me leave. I'm scared, but I feel free for the first time in years." The woman smiled gently. "I'm proud of you," she said. "You're stronger than you think." As they hugged, she realized something powerful. Her story wasn't about embarrassment anymore. It was about empowerment. A few months later, the online noise had settled. The viral moment had passed, but the community that formed around her stayed. She started a small online group where people could share their experiences, not to gossip, but to grow. They talked about forgiveness, healing, and leer. When the cashier asked if it was for a celebration, she said, Yes, for me. That night, she lit a single candle, placed it on top of the cake, and whispered to herself, "To new beginnings." Then she laughed quietly, took a bite, and felt peace. She had learned that sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't payback or anger. It's healing, happiness, and moving forward with dignity. And that was exactly what she had done. The next few months brought changes she never could have predicted. Life had settled into a calm rhythm again. Mornings filled with soft light, quiet coffee moments, and evenings spent reading or journaling. The chaos from before felt distant now, almost like it had happened to someone else. Her online group, the Calm Circle, continued to grow. At first, only a few dozen people would join her weekly talks, but soon hundreds started tuning in. They listened to her speak about emotional balance, forgiveness, and learning to rebuild yourself after disappointment. She never tried to sound wise. She didn't use fancy words or motivational quotes. She just spoke from experience, the way someone does when they've lived through something real, and that honesty was what drew people in. Every message she received reminded her that what she went through had a purpose. One evening, a man wrote, "Your story helped me realize how I spoke to my wife. I apologized for the first time in years." Another woman wrote, "I used to think being calm meant being weak. You showed me that being calm is being in control." Sometimes she would sit on her couch late at night, scrolling through these messages with quiet gratitude. She didn't feel famous. She just felt connected, part of something bigger than herself. Then one day something unexpected happened. She received an email from a small television network. They wanted to feature her story on a segment about people who turn personal pain into positive change. She read the message twice, unsure if it was real. She even thought it might be a prank at first, but when she called the number they provided, the voice on the other end was warm and professional. "We've followed your videos and your online group," the woman on the phone said. "Your story is inspiring. We'd love to invite you to share it on our morning program." For a moment, she didn't know what to say. She had never been on TV. She wasn't used to lights, cameras, or being called an inspiration. She was just someone who went through a painful moment and decided not to let it break her. "Thank you," she finally said. "I'll think about it." That night she sat by the window, the same place she always went to think. The city lights flickered in the distance. She wondered if telling her story publicly again would bring peace or reopen old wounds. She didn't want to relive the humiliation, but she also knew there were people out there who needed to hear what she had learned. After a long moment, she whispered to herself, "If this helps someone else, it's worth it." The next week she walked into the studio. It was bright and buzzing with energy. Cameras rolling, people adjusting lights, makeup artists moving around. She felt a little nervous but tried to stay grounded. The host greeted her kindly, offering her tea and a reassuring smile. When the interview started, the host said, "You became known for staying calm in a situation where many would have reacted with anger. What gave you that strength?" She paused for a moment before answering. "I think I realized that no amount of shouting would undo the pain. Sometimes silence gives you back your power. I chose calm because I didn't want to lose myself in someone else's chaos." The host nodded, clearly moved. "And since then, you've built a community online that's helping thousands of people. Did you ever imagine this would happen?" She smiled softly. "Not at all. I was just trying to heal. But I think when you go through something real, people can feel that truth. We all go through pain, but not everyone talks about it openly." The interview aired the following week. Within hours, her phone buzzed nonstop with messages and notifications. People recognized her at grocery stores, at the bus stop, even at her favorite coffee shop. Some approached her shyly, saying things like, "You helped me," or "Thank you for sharing that." It was overwhelming but heartwarming. She remained humble through it all. She didn't see herself as famous. She just saw herself as someone who had survived and was trying to use that survival to light a path for others. But with attention also came reminders of her past. One evening, as she checked her messages, she saw a familiar name. It was him. He had sent a short message. "I watched your interview. I'm proud of you. I've changed a lot since then. Thank you for teaching me something I didn't understand back then." She read the message twice, her heart heavy but peaceful. She didn't reply right away. She stared out the window, thinking of all the nights she had cried quietly, the confusion, the hurt, the long road to healing. After a while, she wrote back simply, "I'm glad you're growing. I wish you peace, that was all. No anger, no bitterness, just closure." Over the next few weeks, more invitations came. Podcasts, small events, even a local community center wanting her to give a talk. She didn't say yes to everything. She wanted to stay genuine, not turn her experience into a performance. At one event, she spoke in front of a small crowd, mostly women and a few men sitting in folding chairs, holding notebooks. She stood on a modest stage, microphone in hand, and began to speak softly. "When you go through pain, people will tell you to move on quickly," she said. "But healing takes time. It's not about pretending nothing happened. It's about learning to live differently afterward, with more wisdom, more peace, and more care for yourself." As she spoke, people nodded, some even wiping away tears. She noticed one woman sitting near the front looking emotional. After the talk, that woman came up and hugged her tightly. "You don't know me," she said, "but your words made me feel like I can start over." That night, as she walked home, she thought about how her pain had rippled into something healing. What once felt like the worst night of her life had become a turning point, not just for her but for others too. Months passed, and her life slowly took a new direction. She was invited to collaborate with organizations that supported women in emotional recovery and self-worth education. She began mentoring people, helping them build inner strength, but she stayed the same person, humble, gentle, and quietly strong. Sometimes, when she recorded her weekly videos, she would still remember that moment in the restaurant, the silence, the shock, the frosting on her sleeve. But now, instead of shame, she felt gratitude. That moment had changed her life. She often ended her talks with the same words. "Sometimes life tests you in public, but the real victory is how you carry yourself in private afterward." One evening, after finishing an online session, she sat outside on her balcony. The sky was painted in soft shades of orange and pink. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. For the first time in a long time, she felt completely free, not from the past, but from the weight of it. Her phone buzzed again. It was another message, but this one was from someone she didn't know personally. The message said, "I was about to give up on myself, but then I found your videos. You reminded me that calm is not weakness. Thank you." She smiled, her eyes soft with emotion. She set the phone down and whispered, "That's why it happened." Her journey hadn't been about revenge or proving anyone wrong. It had been about rediscovering herself piece by piece and showing others that they could do the same. Later that night, she sat by her window again, her favorite quiet place. She thought about all the people she had met, all the stories she had heard, and how much strength lives in silence. The world had once watched her pain, but now they were watching her peace. And that was the real transformation, the one no camera could capture fully. Time passed and the seasons changed. The cold winds of winter had faded into the soft warmth of spring. Flowers began to bloom again along the sidewalks, and sunlight filtered gently through her apartment windows each morning. Her life had found a new balance. She still worked, still ran her online group, and still recorded her weekly videos. But now she did everything with more purpose and peace. Her days no longer revolved around what had happened that night in the restaurant. That memory no longer hurt. It had simply become part of her story. Her quiet strength had drawn a small but loyal community around her. People who didn't see her as a victim, but as proof that calm can be powerful. Each week she shared lessons she had learned about patience, kindness, and healing. And people listened, not because her words were fancy, but because they came from truth. One morning, while checking her messages, she saw something unexpected. A woman from a well-known social organization had written to her. They were organizing a national event about emotional strength and personal recovery, and they wanted her to be one of the speakers. She smiled as she read the message. It wasn't pride that she felt, but a quiet sense of gratitude. She remembered the woman who once sat alone in her car after the restaurant incident, feeling humiliated and broken. And now that same woman was being invited to speak about peace and strength. It felt almost unreal. A few weeks later, she traveled to the city where the event was being held. It was a large auditorium filled with hundreds of people, men and women of all ages. Banners hung on the walls with messages about hope, respect, and self-worth. She stood backstage holding her notes in trembling hands, taking slow, deep breaths. When her name was called, she walked out to polite applause. The bright lights made it hard to see the audience, but she could feel their presence, the quiet expectation, the curiosity. She took a moment before speaking. 2 years ago, she began softly, I went through something that shook me deeply. It wasn't about money or arguments, it was about respect. I learned that the moment someone disrespects you publicly, you have two choices. You can let anger take control, or you can let calm protect your dignity. The room stayed silent. People leaned forward, listening carefully. She continued, That night I chose calm. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because I refused to let someone else decide how I would behave. I walked away quietly, and that moment changed my life forever. As she spoke, she could feel her heart beating, but not with fear, with strength. She talked about how the pain had led her to start the Calm Circle, how sharing her story had helped others heal, and how forgiveness had set her free. When we hold on to anger, she said, we think we're protecting ourselves. But really, we're just keeping the wound open. Forgiveness isn't saying what happened was okay. It's saying I deserve peace more than I deserve revenge. The audience applauded softly. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Others nodded, understanding every word. When the event ended, people lined up to meet her. A young man in a suit told her that he had reconnected with his mother after years of silence because of something she said online. A woman whispered that she had left an unhealthy relationship after watching her first video. Each story touched her heart deeply. She realized that her pain had created a ripple effect. One small act of grace had encouraged hundreds of others to find their own. That night, when she returned to her hotel room, she stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. She remembered all the versions of herself she had been. The woman who laughed at the dinner table, the one who sat in shock after the cake was thrown, the one who quietly walked away, and the one who rebuilt herself piece by piece. She whispered softly, Thank you for every version of me that didn't give up. The next morning, as she packed her things, she noticed her phone buzzing. It was a message from him again. She hadn't heard from him in months. The message said, I saw your talk online. You've become everything I always said you could be. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted to say I'm sorry again, and thank you for showing me what real strength looks like. She read the message slowly. This time there was no ache in her chest, no sadness, just peace. She typed back gently, Thank you for saying that. I truly wish you happiness and healing. Then she set the phone down and smiled. She wasn't smiling for him, but for herself and for the woman she had become, for the calm she had built, and for the peace she had chosen again and again, even when it wasn't easy. When she returned home, she was greeted with warmth. Her group had sent her dozens of messages cheering her on, saying how proud they were. Someone had even created a small hashtag in her honor. Choose calm. She laughed softly when she saw it. The world had taken her story, something born from humiliation, and turned it into a message of hope. That evening, she decided to host a live session. As people joined, she said, I want to thank you all for walking this journey with me. When this began, I was just trying to find my peace. I didn't know that sharing my pain would help so many others find theirs too. The comments flooded in. Hearts, thank yous, and messages of love. She felt the energy, not as fame, but as community. Someone in the chat asked, Do you ever wish that night never happened? She paused, thinking carefully before answering. I used to, she said softly. For a long time I wished I could erase it, but now I see it differently. That night didn't destroy me. It introduced me to the strongest version of myself. Her voice stayed calm, but there was warmth in it, the kind that only comes from someone who's truly healed. After the live session ended, she sat quietly for a while. The sun had set, and the sky outside was painted in deep shades of purple and gold. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, feeling light. Later that week, she visited her favorite cafe, the one she used to go to on weekends before life got complicated. The barista recognized her and said, I saw you on TV, you're amazing. She smiled modestly. Thank you. I'm just trying to share a little peace. The barista laughed softly. You're doing more than that. As she sat with her tea, she thought about everything she had learned. Life wasn't about having perfect moments. It was about finding grace in the imperfect ones. It was about realizing that peace isn't something you find out there. It's something you build within. A few weeks later, on her birthday, she decided to do something symbolic. She invited a few close friends to her apartment. On the table sat a small red velvet cake, just like the one from that night long ago. When her friends asked why she chose that flavor, she smiled. Because it reminds me that something sweet can still come from something painful. Everyone laughed softly as she lit a single candle. Before blowing it out, she made a wish. Not for success, not for recognition, but for continued peace and kindness in her heart. As the candle flickered out, she felt a sense of closure. Not the kind that comes from forgetting, but the kind that comes from forgiving herself, him, and everything in between. Later that night, after her friends had left, she stood by the window once again. The same city lights sparkled below, but this time she saw them differently. They no longer reminded her of what was lost. They reminded her of what she found, herself. She picked up her notebook and wrote one final line at the top of a blank page. The woman who once stayed silent now speaks peace into the world. And with that, she closed the book gently, feeling whole. She didn't know what the future would bring, but she wasn't afraid anymore. Life would have its storms, but she knew she could handle them. Not with anger, but with calm strength. She turned off the lights, letting the room rest in soft darkness, and whispered one last time before bed, "Peace is not found, it's chosen." And that was her real happy ending. Not one filled with noise or drama, but one filled with quiet grace and the power of peace.